Welcome back to Tranquility du Jour, nourishing conversations about living a full and meaningful life with doses of tranquility. Episode 511. I'm your host, Kimberly Wilson, bringing you tranquility since 2005 through this medium. And delighted to be here with you today to share a returning guest who I think you all love. This is all about working from home. So we're talking with Laura Vanderkam about her latest book, The New Corner Office, How the Most Successful People Work from Home. So in today's conversation, you're going to learn how to turn being cooped up into the ultimate career advantage, managed by task and not time, and how to optimize your well-being, all while working from home. A gentle reminder, subscribe to Tranquility du Jour in your favorite podcast app, such as Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon, or Overcast. Also, visit KimberlyWilson.com/podcast for more episodes and the Tranquility du Jour podcast app, which is available for iPhone and Android. And also, you can find the show notes for this episode at KimberlyWilson.com/511. So a big thank you to those of you who are joining me for my 5-week e-course, TDJ Lifestyle. It is so fun to be with you. And of course, today launched Module 2, which is all about compassion. Last week was wellness. And then we have coming up creativity, mindfulness, and style. And so never fear if you've missed us this round. I'll be sure to offer it again in spring 2021. But in the interim, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who is supporting this. It's just such a delight to be with you weekly in this way. Also, in case you missed Fall TDJ Live, there is a link in the show notes to download the replay, or the TDJ Pop-Up that I did a couple weeks ago where we did a little planning and journaling session together. There's a link to that also in the show notes. And then finally, if you are planning ahead, January 1st, I will be hosting my next virtual retreat. Clearly, this is all focused on the new year, and that's from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And there's a link in the show notes to sign up. So one thing I'm pretty sure about, Tranquility du Jour listeners, is that you love books. You are also bibliophiles. With all the authors that have been interviewed over the years and all the books we have shared, I think that this exciting offer is going to really appeal to you because I know the tricky thing is finding the time to read, right? And that's why Audible can be an excellent resource, listening to audiobooks. And you can listen from any device, anywhere, iPhones, tablets, computers, and then you just pick right up where you left off. They literally have hundreds of thousands of titles, including our book of the month for the online book club, Tranquility du Jour. So sign up for a 30-day free trial, and your first book is free. You can find out more and do this over at audibletrial.com/Tranquility du Jour. That's audibletrial.com/Tranquility du Jour. Happy reading! Laura Vanderkam is the author of several time management and productivity books, including The New Corner Office, Juliet's School of Possibilities, Off the Clock, I Know How She Does It, What the Most Successful People Do Before Breakfast, and 168 Hours. Her work has appeared in publications including The New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Fast Company, and Fortune. She's the host of the podcast Before Breakfast and The New Corner Office, and the co-host with Sarah Hart-Unger of the podcast Best of Both Worlds. She lives outside Philadelphia with her husband and 5 children, and she blogs at lauravanderkam.com. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you for having me back.
It's a treat to have you back, and congrats on your new book, The New Corner Office, How the Most Successful People Work from Home, now needed more than ever.
Yeah, we have a lot of people who are working from home for the first time over the past few months, have had some awkward experiences with it, perhaps, or finding it a little more challenging than they might have imagined. But I do think that we can all get better with practice, and it's a useful life skill. I mean, who knows? We may be working from home for a long time. So good to learn how to do so productively and ambitiously.
Absolutely. And juggling all the distractions in one's personal environment, right?
Yes, well, a few more of those now than probably there will be long term. It is certainly true that the circumstances in which many people are working from home are far from ideal. But I do talk some in this book about how to manage those distractions and others. And if you do, I think that working from home can actually be far more productive long term than working in an office in many ways.
Yeah, I love that. And I look forward to kind of diving into your ideas around that because, again, your books are always filled with such practical tips. And I remember when I found 168 Hours, I think it was in Seattle at some bookstore there. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is what everybody needs. So it's just been fun to see your evolution with so many books and projects. And
it has been a long time, 10 years since 168 hours. Yes.
10 years. I was going to ask. Yeah, that's a journey. Well, I'm going to read a few questions that is from your description about the book, which I just love, just to kind of prepare listeners to what they're going to hear. And it's like, how do you do great work while sitting near the same spot where you watch Netflix? How can you be responsive without losing the focus necessary for getting things done? And how can you maintain and grow your network when you spend less time face to face? Then another thing that you have is how to turn being cooped up into the ultimate career advantage. I was like, please do tell. So
all these secrets, yes.
All these secrets. So yeah, so what led you to write this book? I mean, it's so incredibly timely, clearly. And you've worked from home for what, like 18 years? Is that accurate?
It's been a long time. Yeah, no, 18 years. And I read this book very shortly after the whole pandemic thing started. So it was not already in the works. This was a quick pivot, quick turnaround book. But I realized in March that there were a lot of people who were experiencing this for the first time. And of course, there are a lot of articles on how to work from home and all that. So, well, okay, there's nice things to get set up with, like, yes, you need a chair, you need a desk. But let's sort of move beyond that. Understanding that even the quickest book can't come out for a couple months. And so this came out in July, which is about 4 months after the whole pandemic started. If people are going to be doing this long term, what can they do to really innovate how they work instead of just trying to replicate what we can of the office? How can people not just sort of hang on, but actually advance their careers while they are working from home?
Yeah, and that's what I really thought was interesting about this particular question is like how to turn being cooped up into the ultimate career advantage. Because I think for so many people, it's feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't network the same way. There's not like networking events. It's like, interviews are different, job interviews. And, it just, I think for a lot of people, it can feel as if things are on hold for them. And so for you saying the ultimate career advantage, I was like, oh, please tell me, like, how?
Well, there's a couple reasons that it can be an advantage. I mean, one is that in many cases, people can actually work more. They can, and sometimes they do unintentionally. But when you take away a commute, which is just a giant waste of time in so many ways, you gain back time for yourself and your family, but in many cases, you gain back time to work as well. And we see this with a lot of people logging pretty serious hours working from home. So, if you're looking for time for a new project, maybe it's the time that you would have been commuting. You can also be more productive just because you can work how you work best. When you're in an office, you're often subject to some pretty serious group norms. Even very progressive places, they're like, oh yeah, our hours are flexible. They may be, but if you come in past a certain point, people will be like, oh, what's going on? Or if you leave for a certain amount of time in the middle of the day, oh, where were you? I mean, it's not that you'll get fired, but there's enough of a pushback that a lot of people just don't experiment. Whereas when you're in your home office, you can take risks of that sort because people aren't watching when you're in your chair and when you're not. So if you want to start work a little later and maybe that works for you, great. If you want to split your shifts off a little bit and take a longer break in the middle of the day, great. I know I personally have been freezing during the summer in all my office jobs because the air conditioning is cranked up to down to some ridiculous temperature. And it's very hard to be productive when my fingers are turning blue. But in a home office, you can set the temperature wherever you want, So people are just more comfortable and working how they work best. So you'd be more productive that way. And then there's one other aspect, which I know that, you can manage your energy better, talking about working more or, exercising more because you have the time for that, or cooking more of your own meals. But I think there's another advantage that people can seize. They often don't necessarily, but it's something that's there if you want to look into it, which is that when you are in an office 5 days a week, you invest a lot of time in your colleagues, probably past the point of diminishing returns, right? You go out to lunch with your colleagues, you go out for coffee with your colleagues, you have all your conversations with your colleagues. And they are wonderful people, but they are not the only professionally useful people in the world. And when you are working from home, at least some of the time, and not subject to those same group norms, you can meet with people outside your organization far easier, like meeting somebody else for lunch, meeting somebody else for coffee, stopping work an hour early to have a conversation with somebody external. And, those people can be useful for an organization. I mean, they may be new hires, they may be new clients, but they can also be useful for you personally as you build your network. If your organization ever goes through mass layoffs, your laid off coworkers are just going to be less useful to you than some outside connection that you have made. So not all remote workers do this, of course, but you have the ability to do it in a way that you don't if you're in the same office 5 days a week.
Well, and, even just like the water cooler moments, lovely, right? To be able to have connections, but still thinking of how much time that cuts out of your day, and the constant interruptions. And not that people don't have those at home, but, what does the data show? It takes 20 to 25 minutes to recover after an interruption. It can be constant in an office.
Yeah, and I think this is an important thing to note because a lot of people who are working from home are having an unfortunate number of disruptions that stem from everybody else in their family also being at home at the same time, which is, ultimately not really how it's supposed to work. But I recognize that in a crisis situation, this is how it's going for many people. And so, there's been a sort of romanticizing of, how much we could focus in the office. Like, don't be ridiculous. In an office, you're sitting there in the cubicle and like trying to work, and then Joe stops by to talk about what happened to the cheese on the cafeteria salad bar. You're just like, no, have deadline, have to keep going. And so, I think very few places are going to wind up 100% remote long term, but I do think we'll see a shift in the acceptable amount of hours that could be remote versus the hours that should be in the office. And when you do see that, when you see people working 2 to 3 days per week at home and 2 to 3 days per week in the office, or maybe 1 week a month in the office and 3 weeks at home or whatever, you can then reserve those in-office days for those social chit-chat times, for that collaboration, for really getting to know your colleagues, for being relaxed about it. Like, you can relax while Joe stops by to talk about the salad bar because you have your work from home days to really get stuff done.
Well, and I think though the piece that you mentioned about people are working so much, that is a tricky thing because there's not the work and home separation. I mean, like you wrote about Netflix, here's where I watch Netflix, here's where I do my corporate job. And so how do you encourage people to set those boundaries though, so they are actually logging off at a real time, versus, well, I can keep going, so I will.
Yeah, I'm glad you put it that way. And the Netflix one was just something that was thrown in there because I know that a lot of people think that this is an issue. It is not, okay? Like, high-performing employees do not take to watching Netflix all day just because they can. The far more real danger is that people never log off. That they feel they can't relax at night or on the weekend because they can still see their workspace and presumably there's still work that could be done. And so because of that lack of a physical transition or space between work and home, it can feel like you should always be working and you never have permission to relax. So there's a couple things you can do. One is to create some sort of ritual that tells you, okay, the day is done. You can call a colleague or your team to say goodbye. You could write in a journal. You can go for a walk. You can review tomorrow's to-do list, but come up with some sort of fake commute that would tell you, okay, now we've had this separation between work and home. Work is shut down. Even if I can still see my workspace, I am allowed to watch Netflix if this is what I wish to do with my time. But sort of a more fundamental way you can get around this is I encourage people to start managing their days by task rather than time. And so your day is done when you have gotten through the tasks that you and or your manager set for the day. And every day you have that list of these challenging but doable steps. And when you finish those, you are welcome to log off completely guilt-free because you know you have put in an honest day's labor. And people who manage their time, manage their work days this way, pretty quickly figure out about how much work fits in 8 hours. So it's not like, you're going to be logging off at 11 a.m. every morning, and hopefully you're not logging off at 10 p.m. at night either, because that's how long it took you to get through this stuff. Like, people get pretty good at figuring out, okay, this is going to take me somewhere between, let's say, I'll end between 4 and 6. It may not be exactly 5, but I'm pretty good about figuring that out. But if you manage your days that way, then there's no ambiguity about, like, is it okay to log off? Yes, it is, because I have accomplished what I was supposed to do for the day, so we can end the day completely guilt-free.
And so do you encourage people, and I guess it varies by what they do, but, I always love the idea of having, 3 to 5 MITs, most important tasks for the week, right? So this is really interesting to break it down by day, or, as you say, like your whole chapter, manage by task, not time. So can you give an example maybe of how you incorporate this with your schedule?
Yeah, so I also set weekly priorities, as you do. So I think of the daily task lists as the steps to get to those weekly priorities, as well as the things that come up in any given day or appointments you have already committed to and the like. And so within that, broader set of weekly priorities, then I might have 3 to 5 tasks other than set appointments that I'm trying to get through in any given day. And I will set a daily to-do list, usually the night before, that I then am holding myself to in the course of the day. So, for instance, today is kind of a mop-up day. We're recording this on a Friday, and I generally don't schedule a whole lot of stuff on Friday because it's where I put the stuff that didn't get done came up during the rest of the week. But for instance, yesterday, my goal for the day, my priority for the week was to try to get ahead on some of my podcast recording because I'm about to leave on vacation for a bit. And so I needed to record like 20 short episodes. I have a daily podcast. So, I had to do a lot. They're short. They're like 4 minutes. But, I had like 80 minutes of recording staring me down. And so I needed to get through that. That was my goal for the day. And I did. It was very exciting. And then a second step was listening to at least some of them where there was I had to mark a edit and then send them into the sound producer. So, all this stuff took up a big chunk of the day. But when I was done with it, I was like, woohoo, I can relax. I can go read on the porch for a bit because that is what I had to do for the day. I have done that. Like, no need to get crazy about anything else.
Yeah, no, it's just such a great reminder, I think, on different ways to kind of like break out your day. One of the things that as you were saying that, I was like, what about, when you have little things, like I'm looking over at my planner, you have little things that are like, call doctor, make doctor's appointment, because that's not really like a big task, but it feels so good to mark it off. From a time management perspective, it's always like, no, you tackle the big things first. But what about for people who just love checking things off?
You love to check it off. Well, in order to sort of fit that within the framework, I would sort of group those, like batch the little tasks into, admin time, right? And so every week, you might have a batched admin time, and that could be one of your daily task lists. And during that time, you call the doctor, the dentist, the fridge repair guy, fill out the form for X, and try and batch those so they are not always an option, and they are not always luring you into that easy win. Like, well, I don't actually feel like writing that book proposal right now. Hey, look, here's a short form I could fill out, and crossing it off would look exactly the same on my to-do list as writing that book proposal. And clearly one's more important than the other. And so like grouping those into one chunk, then you don't get the same easy win as you would with, to make it look the same as something that actually is a bigger priority for you.
I love that. It's such a great reminder, the batching of tasks. And I should have like a little admin one, because otherwise you're doing a little admin-y stuff every day. And it's just like not a great use of time and energy. But you're right. I mean, if I mark that off, it'd be the same thing as marking off a book proposal.
Yep.
And can you speak to batching? Because just in case our listeners are not aware of what that is.
Grouping things together and then trying to get through all of them in sort of one chunk of time. And so if you, for instance, have a ton of forms to fill out, rather than doing a bit here and there through the week, designating one spot, let's say Thursday right after lunch, might fit into your week when you take an hour and go through all of that stuff. And that way you're sort of in the mode of it, and it can be helpful too if you have certain information you have to look up for all your forms, have your health insurance card out, or, you are right by your scanner, and so, you can scan everything at the same time. So you get some efficiencies that way, and also you don't have the problem of task switching constantly, and as we said, feeling like you've done something big and important because you filled out 2 forms when really those weren't the big important things that you were trying to get done for the day.
And what about getting into the rhythm, right? So you have a whole chapter about like getting the rhythm just right. So, what do you think like a well-planned work day looks like, drawing on your work from like how to have, most successful people do in the morning, things along those lines. It's like, what do you think with regard to the work from home is like a good rhythm?
Yeah, a good workday has a rhythm, that there's a certain template to it, and it can be different from person to person, but the template allows you to spend less time making decisions about what I should be doing in any given moment. It also acknowledges that people's energy and ability to focus changes through the day, and there are certain things we can do to replenish our energy, but if we don't do them, then we're pretty much asking for trouble in terms of getting anything done. So I suggest that you figure out a way to open the day, something that puts you into work mode, whatever that happens to be. I suggest that you match your most important work to your most productive time. For most people, that is in the morning. You have that cup of coffee, you can conquer the world. That optimism tends to slide a lot in the course of the day, but it's there at like 8:30 a.m. So roll with it then. Do not schedule a little call about nothing or fill out a form at 8:30 a.m. That's just not the best use of that time. You should proactively schedule your breaks for the times when your energy will flag. For most people, that's probably going to be mid-morning, lunch, and mid-afternoon. Definitely mid-afternoon. There's this time around 2:30, 3 o'clock when people are, often say, oh, I can power through. I'm going to get through everything. Look at me. Look how productive I'm being. And then, you're reading the same email 6 times in a row and like following links. And next thing you know, you're like shopping for a sofa. And so what you need to do is proactively put in something that's going to boost your energy level, like a real break. So go outside, get some, go for a walk, like walk your dog, go call a friend, get some fresh air, but something to re-energize yourself. And, generally put the things like answering emails or, meetings that are not going to be incredibly intense in the afternoon. That's a better time for those sorts of things. And then come up with some way to end the day. Yeah, have your ending ritual like that. That now I am done. I have marched a good amount today. I've lived to fight again tomorrow, to march again tomorrow. And that's it.
Yeah, no, good reminders. And I do think something that you said earlier is just good to emphasize is this rituals, right? A ritual of, and thinking about, okay, all the time that is being saved from commuting. I mean, for some people, it's like 2 hours a day. And so using that as time to, I don't know, maybe you want to learn a new language or do something that you're like, I haven't had time for this, but it's something I've always wanted to do.
Yeah, you certainly can use that time for those sorts of things. And I'd probably recommend doing the morning commute, devoting the morning commute to those sorts of things, because it can be very easy to say, I'm going to learn French after my workday. And you get to the end of your workday and you're like, I am not going to work on my French today because you're tired. Right. So if you want to do anything that is important to you but is not required, generally you should aim to do that at the time when you have more energy and ambition, which is, again, for most people, morning. Not everybody, but for most people.
And what about thinking big? Okay, you have a whole chapter devoted to this. And how do you encourage listeners to kind of think big?
So what I mean by thinking big is that in the past, working from home was seen as this, just like a work-life balance perk, right? It's something for people who are taking their foot off the gas for a while. She wants to work from home, so, clearly she's not in the running for management or whatever. And fortunately, of all the things to come out of the pandemic, I think that's one mindset that might shift a bit, since everybody has been working from home. It is no longer just a mommy thing, for instance. So it's good to see that you can still be an ambitious professional person, even if you are working from home. That said, not everybody is, in that mindset of, well, how can we think big? So we talked about growing your network. Like you can, have virtual meetings and virtual coffees with people, or in person, if that's something that you can do in the place where you are. It's also about just devoting time to thinking about your career, thinking about what you would like to do with your time and what you would like your career to look like. It's about building your platform, becoming more of a thought leader in some area, a recognized expert in something, and letting people know about that, right? Because the more that you can have people know you specifically for something and want to work with you specifically, the more leverage you have in general. And so, if people want to keep working from home after the pandemic, for instance, having that sort of leverage of like, oh yeah, well, we have to have her on the call because she's the only person who knows so much about this. Well, you want to take that call from your house, fine.
And what about optimizing well-being? Okay, because that's a big one right now. I mean, for so many people from a mental health perspective, and but just in general, what do you think with regard to working from home?
Well, there's a couple things you can do. I mean, we talked about how working from home allows you to steward your energy better. I mean, because commutes burn an incredible amount of time and energy for accomplishing absolutely nothing except moving your body from one place to another. So you can use that time, if you are wise, for exercise, for getting a little bit of extra sleep, maybe for preparing healthy meals or things like that. Optimizing well-being, making yourself comfortable. Like, you're in a home office, you definitely need to think about your posture, think about, that the setup is comfortable and supports your best work. I encourage people to look at beautiful things in the course of the day. Like, make sure you have some natural light by where you're working. You can look out a window. And the really cool part about working from home is you can curate what is out that window often in a way that you just can't in a corporate office park. Like even if you're running the place, like the grounds is a completely separate thing. You're not going to get them to put a certain thing right outside your window, but you can in your house. Like if that's your patch of grass outside, you put whatever you want. So that's a nice part of it. Just thinking in terms of mental health, I know that setting boundaries is helpful, having some sort of life outside of work. I encourage people to get, a hobby. Like if you have caregiving responsibilities, there is going to be an end to your day. I mean, somebody has to feed your family at some point. But if you don't, it can be easy to continue half working, half not working all night. So you might want to come up with some sort of hobby or regular get together, even if virtually, with friends or relatives, or a volunteering gig, so that you have something at least a few days a week that forces you to end things. And not just because, oh, in general, I should stop work, because that's not a very compelling story, but here's something I'm going to go do. That is important for me to do. Back when I first started working from home and did not have a family at the time, and my roommate was traveling a lot for work, I wound up joining several community choirs, because then a couple nights a week, I would have to leave my house to go to rehearsal at a certain time. And so generally would have to wrap up work by about 6 o'clock. And that just made me much more efficient than if I just kept going all night long.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea, is to have things set up that you're like, okay, I have to be here at a certain time. And I think then it's like, it helps you be like, okay, how many tasks can I get done and be out of here by 5 o'clock for a tea date with a friend in the open air outside.
Open air, yeah, 6 feet apart, whatever totally. It's supposed to be.
Masks on. Well, any final thoughts about working from home before I ask you our last question?
We've talked about the importance of boundaries, and that's certainly, I think, an important thing for many people. But if you've kind of realized after a while that you've reached more of the advanced stage of working from home, they don't have to be quite so stark. Like, you can be a bit more porous with things. Like, you may decide that actually, I like to work a little bit in the morning, take a longer break in the afternoon, then work in the evening, perhaps, that maybe that's what works for you. Or, that you want to hang out with your family for a certain amount of time during the day and work sort of odd hours around that to make that possible. You can take on, for instance, longer exercise ideas. You go to a Pilates class at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and not feel like a huge clocker, because you're going to be working from 5 to 7 o'clock at night. So you can split things up a little bit more and give yourself permission to move work around, because if time, it's flexible. If work is flexible, then as long as you are doing your 40 hours a week or so, and as long as you are meeting your expectations, and as long as your colleagues can reach you when they need to, then you don't actually have to be, seat in the chair 9 to 5 every day. And, there's a lot of joy to be gained by working slightly different hours than that.
Absolutely. And breaking it up with, like you said, a 3 o'clock Pilates class, like it's decadent almost, Yeah,
it feels great. But, why not? Like, if you're still turning in tomorrow, whatever it is you had to turn in tomorrow, like there's no reason not to.
Right. Well, so my last question for you, Laura, is the name of the podcast is Tranquility du Jour. So you have 5 kids now, right?
I do indeed.
That's a lot. Yeah. So how do you find tranquility working from home in the pandemic, 5 kids, a partner?
Yeah. I'm kind of an introvert too. So sometimes I'm just like, there are a lot of people talking around here often at the same time. I run most days. I love to get outside and run around the neighborhood. And I never listen to music or anything. I just am in the silence, enjoying the silence, be alone with my thoughts. And I find that is a real good way to clear my head. And I'll do that at some point during the day, but often if I've done that in the morning, like if I need another something later in the day, I'll go sit on the porch and read by myself or go for a walk or something. But just, separating myself for a little bit, even if it's only 15, 20 minutes, goes a long way toward making me feel a lot more tranquil.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being with us again, and congrats on your new book.
Thank you so much for having me.
So over in the show notes, KimberlyWilson.com/511, you will find links to find Laura on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, plus the 4 previous podcast interviews that we have done, from 168 Hours, Utilizing Weekends Wisely, What Most Successful People Do at Work, and I Know How She Does It. Also, if you are not signed up for the TDJ Insiders Facebook group, please join us. We are reading Notorious RBG right now, which is amazing. And of course, we'll have a new book coming out for November. And also over there, we share resources, get inspiration, make connections, and of course, be part of our online book club. Now, if you're new to Tranquility du Jour, there's a link in the show notes to find out more. And be sure to sign up for our weekly dose of Inbox Love, which are my love notes, where you'll get invites, inspiration, and much more. There's also a link to my books and planner, ways to find me on social media, and a link to shop seasonless, vegan, locally made, eco-friendly fashion, TDJ by Kimberly. And if you have a moment to pen a review of this podcast over on iTunes, would be so grateful. My hope is that it helps other people find more tranquility. And wishing you a wonderful week ahead. Thanks for tuning in and sharing your time with me and my guest. Namaste.